Hello and welcome back to our Value Bites series. We are going to dive in and talk all about values. But before we jump into the sweet bites of content, I want to turn it over to Brandon. Brandon is with Peak Executive Solutions. And Brandon, will you just go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your journey, and your why for launching your coaching business.
Well, thank you for having me, Randy. It's awesome to see you, and hopefully everybody can see me. There's not too much glare off of my new glasses. So, as Randy said, I'm Brandon with Peak Executive Solutions, and I'll tell you a little bit of my backstory because it's really important for me, at least, in what I do for the businesses that I help. So, I'm going to take you back a long way. I actually grew up here in Texas. I'm in Texas now. I don't know where your viewership is in general, but I grew up in DFW over in Garland. And the sad part of the story is that my folks got divorced when I was in about third grade. And what that meant is that I ended up having to spend an awful lot of time with my grandparents that also lived in Dallas. And my grandfather was like super cool. Like he was a contractor. He's been gone now almost 20 years. Um, but he built stuff, he installed flooring and built fence and put on roofs. And so that meant as a third grader, whatever you are, 8 or 10 years old, I got to do some pretty cool stuff and learn how to build things with my hands. So consequently, as I grew older and, went to high school and whatever, I had jobs in machine shops and stuff like that. And I learned an awful lot, not just about how to build stuff and how to work with people, but also about bad bosses, good bosses, and in between bosses. And I think I've told you the story, but I'll tell your listeners,
Yeah, let's
your
hear it.
readers, that I had a boss named Barry, and Barry was super cool. He ran a cabinet shop called Metro Store Fixtures, and we made cabinets for the mall when we had those, if you remember. Um, and we made cabinets for Things Remembered, the Sunglass Hut, and stuff like that, which is really nobody cares about that. But the point is that Barry treated us in a different way, and he made us feel like we were part of something bigger. And even as high schoolers. We were part of the bigger team. We got invited to the Christmas party with all the executives and that kind of stuff. And so I told myself in those days, I'm like, hey, when if I ever owned a business, that's the way I'm going to treat my people because we wanted to do what Barry wanted us to do. So fast forward a little bit, I figured out, gosh, you're not going to pay your bills by building stuff with your hands. Not the way you want to live. So I went to school. I got an engineering degree, and then went to work in a what I called a dirty business because it was really those are my people, right? I went to work in the brick business, and pretty soon after I went to work in the brick business, we got bought by a huge company out of Australia, which sounds terrible, but it wasn't because they were super focused on people, and it really was a match made in heaven in that, we were looking to roll up the industry, the bricks and roof tile and stone industry. And so my part in all that was coming alongside these assets and helping do turnarounds and in some cases just embed systems, processes, but more importantly, the culture that you want to see, so that people want to be part of it and bring in those values, the
Yes.
culture, the habits that makes people want to say, this is a good place to work, even though I might go home a little dirty at the end of the day. And so fast forward, we sold that business it's been almost 3 years ago now. And I'm like, gosh, I still want to help people. I still want to be part of something that brings people along for the journey, right? And my doorbell just rang. Hopefully it's not for me. And the the yeah, cut that out. The more important part of that is that I created Peak Executive Solutions to do just that, to help small and mid-sized businesses with systems and processes because you got to have them. That's how you get professional. That's how You get your business to a point where it runs well and that it runs with the people, right? And not just with the owner.
Hmm.
But it's also how you build it so that it'll sell. And more importantly, uh, you create a culture where everybody can find their part of the story. So all that to tie back into, what Barry taught me all those years ago, and probably a lot of other people, is that when you create a space where there's sort of a magnetic vision and people understand what their part of the story is, um, people are going to be talking about you 30 years from now. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's really great to hear how your journey has really integrated into where you are now and that firsthand experience of helping those small to mid-sized businesses take on what can often seem like that 1,000-pound gorilla, right? It's like, how can I accomplish this? And so kind of thinking about not only your experience and your journey to where you are now, but just when you've worked with owners and businesses and helping integrate their values. Brandon, what have you found have been some of the common challenges? Like, what are those struggles that are seem to be kind of a theme? And then, do you have a tip that could be a way that owners, their leadership team could take a first step to address some of those common challenges?
well, there are challenges. I would call them traps more than anything because I think, we've all worked for the company that had the banners, right? That said, we are honest, we have integrity, we treat each other with respect.
Yes.
And so the first thing I would say is when you have seven core values, you might as well have zero. Okay. So, and I think I told you this one time, if you have three core values, people can remember three, people can align to three. If you have four core values, people can likely align to four. If you have five, they can probably remember three. So having seven or eight core values is probably not true, number one, and people aren't going to remember them, and it's not going to be galvanizing for them. So I think that's the first thing is that there's some traps around aspirational values, like wish we were this values. Um, but I think the other thing is that those permission to play values come into play so often. It's like, well, we're honest. Well, no shit. Okay. Like if you're not honest, why are you even here? Okay. Like if that's what you got nothing unless there's something magical about it, right? And
Right.
we're honest regardless of what it is. If somebody comes in wearing clothes we don't like, we even tell them that. Um,
Yeah, I feel
I
like
think that's a
even
trap. I'm
oh,
sorry.
yeah, no, I feel like your example of kind of having these like wishy-washy values. I feel like when you took us through part of that exercise, it was really about finding what's uniquely yours. And so I know one of the things that we took out of it, it's like, yes, you want to be honest, you want to be truthful and transparent, but we really went deeper, right? And we were like, okay, we're honest no matter what. Like we're about like the conversation and the radical candor and kind of like challenging things in a respectful way. So that was more, we will have the hard conversations is really
Yeah.
we made the concept right of honesty more uniquely ours, and that's so much more powerful to
Yeah.
our clients, our vendors, our team, right? Instead of being like, oh, we're honest, like who, everybody wants that. So I feel
Everybody
like
wants it. Everybody doesn't get it, but it is the
yeah,
covenant in the chaos. So you
yeah,
guys, you guys painted a beautiful picture. I'll tell a story on you.
okay,
Uh,
we'll take it, let's hear it.
yeah, and it's just, when we create values, what we like to do instead of just having a word, we like to turn them into verbs or pithy little sayings or something that people can align behind. As part of the process. And one of the things you guys talked about was continuous improvement. Like we're always striving to make things not just good, but great. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if something's good, we're going to try to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And if I might say this wrong, so you can correct me, but I think what you guys came up with for your pithy little saying was, if it ain't broken, yes, it is.
Yep, that's what we
Is that
said.
right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Congratulations. That's one of my favorites. And I've told a couple of the other system and soul coaches about
Yeah.
that value because we love to share those.
We really leaned into that, and I think like kind of going back to your challenge point of like there's so many traps, like the traps of trying to get those aspirational or those like it looks good on paper, or the ones that are just standard. It's not really doing anything for your external messaging or like internally your team building the culture. So thinking about those traps, what would be a great step for an owner, a leadership team to take so that they could start really diving into what their true values are and what really aligns to their passions?
Great question. Yeah. I mean, if it was me, what I would do first is bring the team together. Let's call it the senior leadership team, if that's easy to say. In small businesses, that might be one or two people. In a bigger business, it might be 5 to 7, whoever, sort of the CEO or owner and the direct reports of whoever that is, maybe somebody from the board. But I think it's a team-based approach to understand what are our true values, what do you see, what do we exhibit, not what we wish we were, but what do we exhibit, what do we appreciate, what do we hire for, and then to test ourselves. It's a challenge, and you went through this exercise, but you need to take a hard look in the mirror and evaluate, be self-aware. Is this really us?
Mm-hmm.
And as a direct report of the CEO, that's kind of hard to hear maybe when the CEO says, "Oh yeah, you don't really always fit the mold of when it's if it's ain't broken,
Mm-hmm.
yes it is." And maybe that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not a core value of the senior team. And there may be somebody that the way their job is aligned, that's not their job to do continuous improvement. Maybe they're more administrative or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the best way in my mind is to have a team-based approach and to say yes or no and to grade ourselves and be honest, not just like, oh yeah, that's us. Yeah, we've got integrity beyond, we have more integrity than most banks, or whatever. Um, but I think that's good. And if people are willing to get honest and to have, as you said earlier, radical candor. Kim Scott, I think, wrote a book called Radical Candor. I don't know if you read that.
It's
It's hard.
on check
Values.
right now.
Patrick Lencioni. I don't remember. I've got it somewhere here. He wrote a book. He wrote a bunch of books, and I love them because they're in parable style and easy to read, which is me. But he says values can set a company apart from the competition by clarifying its identity and serving as a rallying point for employees. But coming up with strong values and sticking to them requires guts. Indeed, an organization considering a values initiative must first come to terms with the fact that when properly practiced, values inflict pain.
Mm,
I've always thought that was pretty powerful because it's like, well, the values is who you are, but it is true. Like when you're hiring somebody and you're trying to find the perfect fit, it's much more challenging to find the perfect fit if you truly know who you are.
mhm.
But you do attract the right people over time, having that magnetic vision and those values that people can align behind. So
I
it's
think
hard, but it's worth it.
I think that's such a great narrative too of how like taking the time to really define your values, what's uniquely yours, not only does it impact how you navigate internally, but hiring's a huge challenge, especially when you think about the time that's wasted. And so it's really almost like a quick, a kind of a quick start way to eliminate those people that they
Right.
themselves would weed themselves out because they're like, oh, well, this isn't really how I would function or what I would value. And so I feel like that's such a testament to one other strength of taking time to really identify your true values. One of
Right.
the things that when you were talking about bringing together the senior leadership team and trying to figure out how to have that conversation and depending upon the dynamics, it can be challenging. And obviously, that's one of the benefits of having a great coach, right? And when you first come in, one of the things you did was do the assessment and for everybody to really be able to rate and say how they feel about the different aspects of the business, right? The processes and how they're functioning, but also the culture and the vision and the values, like where we're going. And that was such a strong exercise because I feel like it allowed the leadership team to just skip in directly into it. Like the answer is already there of,
Hmm.
hey, here's a gap. Let's talk about why it's a gap or why it's so great. And I think that was really strong to diving into the values in maybe a little bit more of an intentional way. What have you seen when you've worked with leadership teams that you've come in and kind of have this assessment? How has that been able to help them go deeper into establishing the values that really matter?
Mm. Wow, that's a great question. I guess I'd start by saying what I find is that the owner, founder, CEO, however you want to call it, the head of the operation is either one of two ways. They either think that their baby is the most beautiful baby that's ever happened, and there couldn't possibly be any thing wrong with it. And then when you see the contrast of the team that reports to them where the grades are fairly low, and you remember we grade both the system side, like how well are we doing? Are we following systems? Are we all on track? Do we have a good cadence with that? Are we measuring the right things? But also the soul side, the heart of the business and the values and the culture. And when you see that contrast, sometimes um, the CEO or senior leader is taken aback that their people feel that lowly about the business. And so it sets us down a little bit of a hard road of creating, because what ends up happening is the values that they think they have are all aligned with the senior leader, just the one, the CEO, right? And they're like, yeah, it's not really how it is around here, bro. Um, in contrast, sometimes the CEO is very hard on the business, right? They're like, we're terrible. We need to get better. We need a better culture. And you see people in the business that grade the business very high. You
Mm-hmm.
guys had a little bit of this disparity where
Yeah.
you and Heather perhaps had a little bit lower score because you're like, we think we can get better. It's that
Mm-hmm.
whole if it ain't broken,
This.
yes it is. Um, and then you had a team member that rated you really high, like this is the best place to work that I've ever been in my whole life. And she felt it, man. She was like she was serious, and like I thought she was gonna cry just talking about it. Right? It was great. Um, and so that values conversation comes a lot easier when it's like that. That's my view. Because sometimes the CEO lives in not in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the challenge, right? And there's a bunch of books out there that talk about what are the best traits of a leader. And one of the top two traits of a leader is being self-aware, right? And that's like looking inwardly, looking in the mirror, like is what I believe, what I think reality?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I, do I think, you know, my baby's the most beautiful baby in the world? It's easier if it's actually a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because my babies were the most beautiful babies in the world.
Of course.
And today is one of my baby's birthday. He turns 27. So
Oh, nice.
I, I know. It's nice. He lives in town here, so we're gonna go to dinner tonight.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that fully answers the question you were getting at, but there's just so much contrast in teams and having those hard conversations, those radical, open conversations where people are listening to understand instead of listening to respond.
Mhm.
Um, they're powerful. They're game changers. And that's, we recommend a weekly sync as part of a coaching that we do. And most teams don't have weekly meetings because they've figured out in their own mind that meetings suck and they don't work. And that's because they aren't measuring the right things. That's my opinion. And they're not having dialogue, they're
Mhm.
having monologue. And so monologues are useless. Dialogues are very helpful.
I
My
think what you were sharing about how y'all utilize kind of the system and soul methodology to dive into values, one of the things that stood out to me is really it's like the first step is admitting that you have a problem, right? Like being able to look inward and make that decision of, okay, do you want values that just look pretty and represent maybe you as this one head, or do you want values that truly are ingrained in everything that you're doing and can
right.
be like aspirational and accurate? Because like you said, perception's reality, and so being able to utilize that a tool to dive in, I think for us it was really helpful.
Yeah.
But just having the conversation and starting. So, okay, one more question because I feel like we could talk all day about value.
Yeah. No, well, we're in alignment. I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. We're values geeks over here. So okay, let's say leadership team comes together, they start having this radical candor, they accept that they have a misalignment and they're gonna make things epic, get their values going the right way, uniquely theirs. Then what? What are the top maybe one, two things that they could take action at right when they come out of the meeting to begin embedding these new and true values into the overall strategy and culture to help leadership and overall to help them embrace it? What would you say? Cream at the top, one to two quick wins.
All right. Well, the first one is like syncing up every week. Have an agenda, create that circle of trust where people can speak their mind, but they also are accountable to the things they said they're going to do, right? And that includes the CEO. The CEO should have some accountability for
Mhm.
certain items within the business. Sometimes that's not always the case. And some of their accountability may be holding others accountable, of course. So that's number one. Meet frequently.
Mhm.
Um, and as part of that meeting frequently, I guess what I would say is you got to have habits, right? That you calendar, right? How often are we going to follow up on our quarterly goals? How often do we check against our KPIs? And what do we do to hold each other and ourselves accountable? That's a good starting spot. And in order to do that, you've got to have clearly defined mission, right? So where are we going? Um, and why are we going there? So I think that's not as easy, perhaps. So maybe that's outside of the scope of what can we start today, but start meeting on a regular basis and make sure that it's on the calendar, same time every week. People know what to expect, which creates trust.
Mhm.
Um, the roles and responsibilities for every role, I think it's super important. Because otherwise you got a lot of people that think they're doing the same thing as everybody else, right? It's like, I don't know how many companies I've dealt with where the the thing they say in the room is they need more people.
Mhm.
And then you find out that half of the room isn't fully employed, right? They're spinning their wheels every day because they don't really know what their job responsibilities are. So I think that helps a bunch is getting clear on roles and responsibilities. And we have a lot of tools that we use in System and Soul to do that. I've got a couple here. Like one is this is actually a personal roadmap, which is a mirror almost of the roadmap. You know, this is more of our strategic planning tool for understanding who we are, where we're going, why, values, and what we're betting for. But this is personal, right? This is more of an HR tool, I would call it. It's like, who am I? Where am I going? What do I aspire to? And it's got the same format, which helps. So it's like having those good conversations about not just about where's the company going, but how am I coming along with the company? I think there's some, you can get started on some stuff like that that I think is pretty straightforward. But certainly having a coach helps because sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees, and you got to get clear, right? You got to get focused. The teams that continue to win are the ones that are hyper focused on the things they can be best at.
I
And
know I know in our experience, like the strategy work that we went to, just kind of the beginning of it, it really allowed us to get like more go deep and more kind of like narrow in a good way. But the weekly syncs, having those weekly meetings to really start to ingrain the values and kind of everything you're doing. One of the fun parts has become the core values section, right? Where we're like, okay, we've defined our unique values. Now let's do some shout outs and talk about how is it showing up for ourselves, for our people. And internally for us, that's almost become like our celebrations and recognitions inspiration. And so the
love
weekly
that.
links was definitely a quick win for us, but then how we could make the structure provided in those more uniquely ours has been really fun to align them with our values because we kind of know what they are now. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so
I love the fact that you're celebrating that. And that's to me like it's huge because um your team members, that's what they'll remember. Like, I mean, and you asked me a question earlier, not specifically about embedding values. Every week when you celebrate those values and seeing or calling out somebody for doing something good, that's embedding that value. And the other people that see that are like, well, hey, I want to get called out for that value. So, it's when somebody buys somebody's coffee in line, that person generally turns around and does something nice for somebody else.
the
It's
pay it
kind of
forward, it's
that's right.
ingrained. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to give us a little bit more about you, your journey, kind of share that side of things, and also some wins and the importance of taking the time to really define values. So, for folks that want to dive in a little bit deeper, learn more about how your expertise could help them get moving in the right direction, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm sure you're going to have some show notes. So, like, follow me on LinkedIn would be one way.
Okay.
But also, I have a website, peakexecutivesolutions.com, www.peakexecutivesolutions.com. And I would love to have a chat about how I might help, small businesses succeed and create a space where everybody can find their part of the story, which is really, as you know, my where my heart is.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to circling back and hearing more about how you help other businesses find their story. Maybe we'll get back together in a couple months and talk more about vision and values.
Love it. All right. Thank you.
Bye, Brandon.